Joining me now to discuss the lack of a plan going forward, Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat of Connecticut. Is that your read of what the White House is gearing up for?
Yeah, you have this new estimate suggesting that because of these early reopenings without enough testing capacity, we're going to get to a point in the early summer where 3,000 people will be dying every single day. That is essentially a 9/11 happening every single day over the course of the summer, a near doubling of the death rate today. The president has lost patience, as he frankly has lost patience with every endeavor he's ever been involved in his life when it doesn't go well right from the get-go, and he is about to lead this country down a potential path of slaughter. In the Northeast, as you mentioned, we have done some of the right things, and so we've been able to turn the trend line in a positive direction. But we've done that without any help from the federal government. When I get on the phone with a hospital in Connecticut, they don't tell me that any of the PPE or the testing machines have come to them through the federal government. They've had to do it all on their own. Today in Connecticut, we're doing thousands less tests than we should be doing. Why? Because we don't have swabs. If we'd started building swabs on a federal basis 2 months ago, we wouldn't be in that position today. So we've made progress in Connecticut, but much of that is going to potentially be reversed because of this administration's insistence on opening up too early, violating their own guidelines. Because even if we beat it in Connecticut, if you have a surge in some other part of the country, it's eventually going to find its way again to our state.
What do you think about this idea that the American citizens are warriors, that the men and women who are in long-term care facilities that have been ravaged by the virus, that the men and women that work in meatpacking facilities around the country, the bus drivers and the Amazon warehouse workers, that they're warriors, that basically they should accept that they may just be giving up their life for this?
I mean, we all, scoffed when I think it was the lieutenant governor of Texas suggested that, grandparents should be willing to die for their grandchildren. And of course, no grandchildren wants to sacrifice their grandparent. And that's essentially what the president is saying, is that we just have to accept that as a price of being able to go to the movie theater again, there are going to be 3,000 people every single day who will die needlessly. And he is, as you mentioned, going to try to obfuscate and confuse people and say that it was China's fault, the WHO's fault. And while there's lots of blame to be spread around here, the simple fact of the matter is that the president put out a plan to reopen the country. And because that plan wasn't realistic, or because he didn't have the patience to stick to it, within weeks of putting it out into the public, he is going to violate it, knowing that ultimately that's going to lead to the death of thousands of Americans.
Two things. One, I think it's so important to stress that what they're doing is violating the Trump administration's own guidelines. It's an 18-page report. It's been set out. It's been talked about. You can read it online. It's their own guidelines for what a state has to do to, quote unquote, reopen. It has 3 phases. It's a fairly sensible document. Everyone's just blowing through it at the urging of the president. It's the Trump administration guidelines they're blowing through. But he decided after 2 weeks he got impatient, and it was fun to go to the Taj Mahal on the night it opened Michael Jackson, and not so fun when it goes bankrupt. And basically he's doing that with the CDC guidelines.
Well, and Chris, he frankly didn't do anything to implement the plan. Let's just take one element of the plan. What the plan says is that once you reopen, you've got to adopt a system of testing, tracing, and quarantine, meaning you test, you find out who that person talked to and had contact with, and then you quarantine those individuals. Well, that doesn't happen without an infrastructure, without staff, without funding. And just since the plan was released, the administration has had 2 weeks to work with Congress to appropriate money to the states, to local public health departments, to hire up all the people who would do this. Instead, they have resisted efforts to try to fund those activities. They've said that states should go bankrupt. And so even since they released the plan, they have resisted any efforts to implement it. So it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that it didn't work, and that now they are left with only one option, which is to just sort of go along with the increasing tide being driven by Trump's base and open up the country too soon.
Final thought. Charlie Warzel, who writes for the New York Times, had this tweet that's been stuck in my head. He said, the U.S. virus response feels so much like our response to gun violence. Seems easy to prevent. Others have. But But it's not who we are. A certain idea of freedom makes it impossible, so we move on, just learn to accept a level of human loss that other countries won't tolerate. What do you think of that?
So I think it's similar in some ways, but different in others. On gun violence, there's a really powerful political constituency on the other side that we have to beat. We know what to do, but we're not willing to do it because of a political force that exists on the other side. What makes the Trump administration's lack of response so unconscionable is that there isn't a political force on the other side. Similar to the gun violence epidemic, we know what to do. We could follow what countries like South Korea did, and we could get our hands wrapped around this epidemic. But what makes it so unconscionable is that there's nobody stopping the Trump administration from following South Korea's lead. There's nobody stopping them from deciding to fund a testing, tracing, and quarantine system. There isn't an NRA when it comes to the politics surrounding this issue. If Trump would lead and do the things that we know would get this epidemic under control, we could save thousands of lives. And that, I think, is the critical difference.
Yeah, the vast silent majority of this country across all sorts of different lines wants to keep each other safe, to get this virus under control, to look out for each other, and doesn't want to get sick and don't want loved ones to die. That's the vast majority of this country, and a small group sliver is calling the shots right now in the presidency. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, it's always great to have you, sir. Thank you very much.